So we have this downer of a gospel full of division. We're going to have to make something out of this, aren't we? Let's get into the gospel passage for proper 28c. Now, Jesus and the disciples are leaving the temple, and the disciples are in awe of the place. And Jesus is like, yeah, all that's going to go. Jesus warned them of a few things: not to be led astray, upcoming division, and persecution. And it's in that part about the persecution in which we discover that we have an opportunity to testify, to endure, and persevere. Has that remarkable moment of saying, don't worry what you're going to say, don't plan it out, I'll give you the words. So this is a gospel about endurance, isn't it? The problem in the text is that we don't know how to take this warning. Is this back then, now, or in the future? And it's also hard to find the grace in endure suffering. But ultimately, I think the question may be, how do we know? How do we know who to hold on to, what to hold on to, where to go in the midst of suffering? Jesus warns about following Jesus, not the false prophets. But we don't necessarily know who's the false prophet. That is ultimately the great question we have at the moment, isn't it? We don't know which way to go. We're trusting in our institutions, and we're trusting in our church. We're trusting in our priests and our pastors, and we're trusting in all of our religious leaders. And are they following Jesus, or are they false prophets? We don't necessarily know when we're on the right track, do we? Well, the backdrop for this gospel passage is the temple and its grandeur. And I love that moment when they're leaving and the disciples are clearly awestruck. They're clearly enticed and feeling like this must be the pinnacle of all that is divine. It kind of reminds me of that scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade when they're trying to figure out which is the true cup used at the Last Supper. And of course, the Nazi thinks it's got to be the bejeweled, most glorious, most beautiful of vessels. And he drinks from it and dies. And of course, it is the clay cup, the most humble vessel among them all. That is the one that Jesus used. We get in that this wonderful dichotomy between our own expectations and the expectations that are given to us about how big and glorious God must be. So therefore, Jesus and what Jesus wants must be big and glorious and powerful and strong, right? And all of that. When in fact, he keeps telling us over and over again, it's about humility and mercy and love. And in that sense, the vision forward, the path forward, who's the voice we're supposed to listen to, becomes more and more clear, doesn't it? As we pay attention to the vision that Jesus has, it's hard to see all of these visions of power and control and authority fitting with what Jesus directs us to. This gospel passage talks about trust and perseverance. It talks about surviving. It talks about the words coming to us. It invites us into witness during a hard time. This is not an easy passage to work with. It's not one that feels as great and obvious to us as the Good Samaritan parable or the lost sons, right? Where we can get into this and just talk about the mercy and love of God. This one is much darker and more difficult. But that same story is here. It's the thing that helps us get through the dark time. So ultimately we're invited into finding it rather than stumbling across it and expecting it to be there. We're left with this hope. We're left in this opportunity to exercise the trust and hope and mercy and love that Jesus has been talking about the whole time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.